What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to the channel. Now, for those of you who have been around for a while, you will probably realize that this is a little bit of a different video. So right now, myself and Jen are busy house sitting down in KZN, and we're in our hometown of Howick. And for any of you that have been to Howick, you will know that often the weather is just not all that great. So today is one of those days where it's a bit cold, miserable, and wet, and it got me thinking. A couple of weeks ago, we did a poll on Instagram asking people what they thought the best first project car in South Africa was. And needless to say, the answers that everyone came up with were very interesting. So I decided to look into some of these options that were suggested. Some of them were not all that surprising, while some of them I simply hadn't thought of. And while I was sitting here today, I thought I would jump onto Google and see if there were any lists of some of the best project cars. Now, unsurprisingly, us being based in South Africa, most of these lists were targeted towards the US, the UK, Australia, Japan, but none of them specifically addressed South Africa. Now, although many of these cars on these lists were available locally, there were many that weren't. Many American cars that weren't available here, many Japanese cars that weren't available here, and the same can be said about the UK and Australia. So I thought, well, why not make a video discussing the different cars that were available here that would make a very good first project car. Now, for the purposes of this video, I decided to keep the budget under 100,000 Rand or $5,500 US. Now, for our international viewers, you might be thinking $5,500 US, you can't get much for that. But surprisingly, you can. Now, as the rest of the world has seen a massive boom with the second-hand car market going through the roof, and many of the cars that are labeled as collectible have got a certain unspoken tax on them. Movies such as Fast and Furious have also pushed the price of certain vehicles through the roof and have made them simply unattainable. The rise of people wanting to go to track days and especially drifting has also influenced the price of certain cars. The prices of cars such as 200 SXs, or known as 240 SXs or 180 SXs, basically S13s, have gone through the roof because of drift tax. So these cars that were once very attainable and were a very good starting point for any enthusiast are simply too expensive now. Now, when considering cars for this list, I decided to bring into play a couple different criteria. Firstly, being price and attainability. Obviously, there's no point in throwing in a car that is going to cost you an arm and a leg and that you will not be able to find as a first project car. So I decided to keep the budget low for this one and to keep it focused on cars that you can actually find. Second one is parts and aftermarket support. It's very important when buying a second-hand car to build up that you are able to find parts for it. Whether it's parts to improve it or parts to simply restore it, you need to be able to find these parts and at an attainable price for the project to be worth it. And point three is about fun, purpose, and street cred. Now, these three things might seem like separate criteria, but they kind of go hand in hand. Most project cars, from stance to track, have some sort of purpose that you're wanting to fulfill. The fun aspect is whether you find enjoyment from building it or fun from driving it. Both of those things kind of need to be considered because you don't want to hate what you're building and you don't want to hate what you're driving either. And the last part of that is obviously street cred. Now, many of us go to car meets, car events, that sort of thing, and you want to be rocking up in something that you're proud to be seen driving. Now, for some, this may not matter at all, but for many people, it is important to get approval from the rest of the car community. Now, I'm not saying that you must build a car to make others happy, but we all know that it is always nice when people come up to you and say, hey, I really like your car. But like I said, that shouldn't be the focal point. You should be building a car for you. But without rambling on too much further, I think we should jump into today's video. This is the first time I've tried a format like this, so if you do enjoy it, let us know in the comments below. I'd really like to know what you guys think about a video like this. And also, only a small percentage of our viewers are actually subscribed to the channel. So if you do enjoy this content and you want to see more of it, please smash that subscribe button, hit the like button, share the video with a friend. We really do appreciate it. But now, let's jump into the list. At number 10 is a vehicle that has a cult-like following all over the world. From Southern America to the States to here to the UK to Australia, you have either owned one of these or you know someone who has owned one. I can almost guarantee it. Given affectionate nicknames all over the world, from the Bug to the People's Car to Hitler's car, or locally known as the Faller, I'm of course talking about the Volkswagen Beetle. Now, as I said, the Beetle is a bit of a household name. You either know someone who has owned one or you've probably owned one yourself at some point in your life, and they have a fan base that is fanatical. Now, the VW Beetle is a very versatile project car, and it is relatively easy to work on, seeing as that it's an older car. It doesn't have a lot of the electrical and electronic components that modern cars have, which could create problems in your first project car build. The simpler layout of the vehicle will also make your life just that much easier, and the community that is based around the Beetle will allow you to be able to learn from others' mistakes, and cut some corners in the learning curve. After having a look on Facebook Marketplace for a short while, I found a couple Beetles that fit well into the budget. These cars are a great basis. You can make something that is slammed out, you can make a rat rod, you can go off-road, make a Baja bug. The potential is there to let your imagination run wild. Seeing as there were so many made, parts are available. They are becoming scarcer as the cars get older, but having said that, there are many VW Beetle specialists, even here in South Africa, that can point you in the right direction of the parts and people that you need to make your build happen. Now, as with anything, there are obviously downsides. For anyone that is wanting to build something that is insanely fast, something that pushes you into the back of your seat, this might not be the car for you. Now, I'm not saying it can't be done. Obviously, anything with enough imagination, money, and time can be done, but it might not be the best starting point to build something that's going to destroy everything else off the line, robot to robot. Obviously, with enough time and money, you can do an engine swap, you can do a bunch of different things to those cars, and they will be fast. Now, if you're wanting something that gives you a bit of a leg up in the pursuit of speed, then this next car might be for you. Next on our list at number 9 is the quintessential hot boy JDM import car. It has featured in many movies and it is quickly becoming a modern classic. Featuring in movies such as The Fast and Furious, where Hector was apparently running 3 of them with T66 turbos, spoon engines, and a Motec system exhaust, whatever that is. I'm of course talking about the Honda Civic. Now here in South Africa, we only got from the 6th generation onwards. There are 10 generations of Civics throughout history. Starting in 1972 and obviously going all the way through to the present, Honda Civics have always been around in some shape or form. The 6th generation we got locally is more commonly referred to as the EK. This comes from the Type R version of the vehicle, which was known as the EK9. Now locally, we got the EK Civic as a 3-door hatch. And I know in many other parts of the world, there was a sedan version as well, which we subsequently did get, but for some other reason, it was renamed as a Honda Ballade. Now the appeal behind these Civics is the engine. Many of these Civics came out with the famous B-Series VTEC engine. Now obviously you did get variants here that didn't have the B-Series engine, but if you can find one with a B16, you are in for a good time. These cars came standard with 130 kilowatts or 174 horsepower if you're from overseas. Now considering this was from a naturally aspirated 1.6 litre engine, this is fairly impressive even by today's standards. You can go through the process of porting and flowing the head, polishing, cams, all of that sort of thing. But what has become more common practice these days is forced induction. With the huge aftermarket support behind the Civic, it's very easy to find yourself a set of forged pistons and forged con rods and throw a big turbo on there to make incredible power. To this day, one of the most visceral experiences I have ever had in a car was with a friend of mine's B16 powered EK9. He had a T3, T4 turbo on this thing and it made ridiculous power. Wheel spun all the way up to 5th gear, and that feeling of the boost coming on followed by the VTEC is simply incredible and cannot be explained. So for any of you looking for a good basis to make something that's extremely fast, I would highly suggest looking at a Civic. The downside is, yes, as much as the aftermarket support is there, locally you might have to import a lot of the parts, which can get costly. But having said that, there are many local Honda specialists that can point you in the right direction or might even have the parts on hand. Now when it comes to Civics, I've had a look around on Marketplace and they go from anywhere between 30,000 Rand and 100,000 Rand. But now you're probably thinking to yourself, okay, that's great and all, I can make something that's fast or I can make something that's slammed and cruising. But what if I want to go sideways? Neither of these two cars really tickle my fancy. Well, I think this next one will come into play because this next one is a South African classic. This car is loved all over the world, but specifically in South Africa, it is the pivot point for spinning. Affectionately known locally as a Gusheshe, I'm of course talking about the E30 BMW. Now before I go any further, obviously within this budget, I'm not talking about importing yourself an E30 M3 or getting a local 325 IS or 333 IS. I am talking on the lower end of the budget. 2-door E30 BMWs have gone through the roof, but having said that, there's nothing wrong with a 4-door. 4-door E30 BMWs, once slammed out and set on a nice set of wheels, can look just as good as a 2-door. Now the E30 BMW has got a huge appreciation here in South Africa. Not only does it form the backbone of spinning, it is a well-loved car in its own regard. It is almost impossible to go to any car show or meet without seeing at least one BMW E30 that has been slammed and has been put on a really nice set of wheels. It always gets attention and people love it. Now the less desirable four-door variants of these cars won't set you back a lot of money. The important factor to look into is condition, maintenance, that sort of thing, but that goes to be said about any project car. But if you're simply after the look, I would highly suggest looking at something like a 318i, where you don't necessarily need the power, but you can get exactly the same look as one of its big brothers at a fraction of the cost. If you're wanting to go drifting, that is also an option, and I would still suggest going for one of the baby models such as the 318i. The reason for this is, regardless of what engine you're going to go for in an E30, you are more than likely going to want to engine swap it. And of course, there is no point in buying one with a bigger, more desirable engine if you're going to rip it out anyway. So this car really does open many different doors, with the big draw card obviously being that it's rear wheel drive. Now, as I said previously, obviously this car is synonymous with spinning in South Africa, and if you're wanting to go spinning, well, get yourself one, throw some old tires on it, and you are good to go. Now, there are two downsides to the E30. One is that being a BMW, parts are going to come at a premium. I'm not necessarily saying they're going to be hard to find, but you might pay extra compared to other project cars. Secondly, and this is one that you may not be thinking of when going through Facebook Marketplace looking for an E30, E30 BMWs have become a hot target, and theft reports have definitely been on the rise. So it's just something to remember when you're looking at one of these E30 BMWs. Make sure to keep that in mind, and maybe get the insurance sorted pretty quickly. Right, and at number 7 on our list is something that is also German. This brand is well loved throughout South Africa and forms part of the VW group. Known for making amazing cars and also known for not having the best resale value, this makes the perfect concoction for a good project car. I am talking about the Audi A3 and A4 1.8 turbos. Now, these cars are the first car on the list that come turbocharged from the factory. And these cars are a great way to get your foot in the door of something that makes boost noises. Older examples of A3s and A4s can be picked up for a really good price. Now, obviously the A4 is the 4-door and is somewhat less desirable, but having said that, the older A4 wagons are absolutely beautiful machines in my opinion. But for the purpose of this video, I'm going to focus on the A3, simply because they are easier to find and are generally slightly cheaper. Now, the first model A3, which was called the 8L, was made from 1996 until 2003. The second generation spanned all the way from 2003 until 2013, going through various facelifts in the process. Now, within these two generations, there were many different engine options. Diesel, petrol, naturally aspirated, turbocharged. There was even a 3.2 litre all-wheel drive VR6 version of the Audi A3 8P. But for the purposes of this video, I'm going to focus on the 1.8 turbo, simply because, like I say, it's a very easy way to get your foot in the door of that turbocharged life. Now, obviously, if you want to spend a little bit of extra money, you can go the route of an S3, or if you want to spend a hell of a lot more money, you can go the route of an RS3. But if you're going for an A3 1.8, you're still buying yourself about 118 kilowatts in the 8P format and 110 kilowatts in the 8L format. This roughly equates to 160 and 150 horsepower respectively. But unlike the other cars on this list, being turbocharged, it leaves very good headroom for tuning capability. It is much easier to squeeze more power out of a standard turbocharged engine than it is a standard naturally aspirated engine. You simply up the boost, up the fuel, and there you go, you've got more power. Okay, well, it's not that simple, but you get the gist of it. These cars, in my opinion, have aged very well, and you are getting a lot of car for the money. These cars specifically do stretch the top end of our budget for the most part, but cheaper examples can be found if you are willing to put in the work. And of course, most of the architecture underneath the vehicle is shared with the Golf 5. This means that finding parts locally shouldn't be all that difficult. Obviously, certain parts of the vehicle are Audi specific and they might give you a slightly harder time, but places such as Volkswagen should be able to help you out. Now, onto the negatives of this vehicle, and it's more of things to look out for. Once again, as with the E30, they are somewhat of a hijacking risk, so you will have to keep your wits about you because they are known to be stolen. Secondly, is to check the service history and to check specifically how often the oil's been changed. These 1.8 litre turbo 4 parts are known to sludge up their oil. So if the car hasn't had regular oil changes, I would suggest thinking twice about buying that specific example. Now, the next car on the list is subsequently a very close relative of the Audi A3. And when I say close relative, as I've just mentioned, it is basically the same car underneath. And I'm of course talking about the Golf, but specifically, I'm talking about the Golf 5. Golf 5 GTIs have been around for a while now, and their prices have really come down. This can kind of be viewed as an alternative to getting yourself an A3. It's a good entry point to getting into turbocharged life, and these do come with significantly more power than their slightly more luxurious cousins. The Golf 5 GTI comes with a 2-litre turbo and is front-wheel drive. GTIs are loved all over South Africa, affectionately known as Vrpaz, and their popularity was shown back in 2017 when VW South Africa said that 60% of all Golfs sold in South Africa for that year were GTIs, which effectively means if you've got a 2017 Golf TSI, your car is effectively more rare than a GTI. Golf 5 GTIs are a lot of car, and like I said, their prices have really come down, so it is worth considering. Just note, they are a little bit older, so you're more than likely going to have to hunt around to find one that doesn't have a lot of mileage, and even then, that might be slightly out of your budget. So once again, just check the service history, make sure it's been maintained properly before purchasing it. And yes, once again, it is a hijacking risk, but this probably applies to most of the cars on this list at this point. So just assume it's a hijacking risk. Be safe, guys. And for our next car, it is something that is near and dear to my heart. It is something that I grew up with. It is something that my dad drilled into my head. If you haven't seen the video of where he runs us through his example of this car in New Zealand, I will put that up here right now. This car is a British classic. It is a tiny but mighty hero of the car world, defeating bigger and much more powerful cars at the Monte Carlo Rally. I'm of course talking about the classic Mini. Now the classic Mini, much like the Beetle, has a cult-like following, and there is a massive following for them locally as well. For many of my generation, our parents often had Minis as their first cars, and for good reason. They were small, practical, light on fuel, and easy to work on. And these are the same reasons why they make a fantastic project car. Now, while for a clean example, especially something older like a Mark 1 or a genuine Cooper, you may pay a lot of money, there are cheaper alternatives. Many Minis from the 70s or 80s are still quite affordable. Parts availability is somewhat okay locally, but you still might have to resort to importing some stuff from overseas. But having said that, you will find much support, and if you can't find anything, just message my dad. These cars are great for first-time project car owners because they are relatively simple and easy to work on. These cars are also slowly appreciating, so you might be finding yourself in a position of buying one now, putting a little bit more money into it, getting it perfect, and in a couple of years' time, you may actually make a profit on it, which is very unusual with a project car. Minis are fantastic for whatever purpose you're wanting to use them for. They make fantastic track weapons and often outshine more powerful and stronger vehicles around the track due to their nimble abilities around the corners. If you're wanting to rally it, well, they've already proven themselves in that regard. If you're wanting to engine swap it, there's also many people around the world who have stuck Honda VTEC engines in them, Toyota 4AGEs. There are even a couple crazy people in the UK that stick Hayabusa and Yamaha R1 motorbike engines in them. So I would highly suggest considering a Mini as your first project car, because let's be honest, who doesn't love a Mini? Right, so the next car on our list is at the number 4 spot and is probably the quintessential project car. I think for many people around the world, when they think of something small, easy to work on, and fun, this is probably one of the go-tos. Many YouTube channels were built off of the foundation of this car, and probably for good reason. It is regarded as one of the best driver's cars out there and is a really good entry point into owning a sports car. The more desirable version comes up with the iconic flip-up headlights, and by that alone, I'm sure you know that I'm talking about the Mazda MX-5 or Miata. Now, with the way prices are going of the first generation, also known as the NA, I don't think you are likely to find one of these within the 100,000 Rand / $5,500 budget. So we're going to be looking at the Mazda MX-5 NB, which is the second generation. Now, many people don't really regard it to be as good looking car as the NA, but I still think it is a fantastic looking little sports car in its own right. Now, many of you might be thinking, if I'm talking Mazda, why not talk about something like an RX-8, which is probably going to cost you around the same price and is arguably a big brother to the MX series? Well, I think that's quite simply because I think a rotary, especially one as problematic as what comes in the RX-8, is probably a bad shout for a first project car. It's very complex and a very specialized engine, which I don't think would make for a good first time working on a car. The MX-5 has a huge following all around the world and has many dedicated racing series. So if you're wanting to get yourself onto a track, it's definitely one to consider. Now, while the MX-5 is definitely the entryway into owning a sports car, and they are known for their fantastic handling, they're not known to be much of a powerhouse. If you're chasing something that's going to be a little bit quicker, you're going to have to factor in spending a little bit of extra money or a lot of extra money to up the power. There are many supercharger and turbocharging kits available for them, but locally you might have to find someone who specializes in doing these conversions, or you might have to import a kit yourself. The NB MX-5s do go for upward of 100,000 Rand, but you can find a decent example for just shy of it. The downside to an MX-5 is there's not a lot of them locally. They were brought in by Mazda, so I'm not saying that they're not available, but you might just have to hunt around to find the right one, and it might take you a little while. But having said that, I still think they are a fantastic way to go racing, especially on a budget. Now, number 3 on this list is something I'm seriously considering myself, and is something that I would really like to be the first project car that we have on the channel. We have already spoken about its older brother, but I think this one ticks more boxes for me personally anyway. This car is a great value for money and is a good way to get yourself into something rear-wheel drive and something that can provide you with a good drift platform, a good track platform, whatever you want to do. I think it can do it all. So at number 3 on this list, we've got the E36 BMW. Now, the E36 BMW was made throughout most of the 90s and is arguably the less desirable version of the E30. Whilst many people prefer the look of an E30, the E36 is somewhat overlooked, but for a first project car, that kind of plays into our hands a little bit. What that means is their prices are significantly lower and you get more car for your money. Now, once again, as with the E30, I'm not talking M3s, I'm not talking two-door coupes. This is more aimed at the 4 doors. For this sort of money, you can also get the 2-door convertible, but personally, I'm not a huge fan of the convertibles. I would rather go the 4-door route. The aftermarket support and the customizability of these cars means that you can make something that looks really awesome and relatively easily. Due to the popularity in South Africa, the aftermarket support is quite high. Many of your customizing places such as AutoStyle and Max Motorsport will carry lips, bumpers, spoilers, etc., so you can really modify the car to make it look exactly how you want it to look. The fact that a lot of them came with straight 6 engines is also very desirable. There are turbocharging kits that are made for these engines. Alternatively, because you've got so much real estate in the engine bay, you could always slap something else in there. Personally, my ideal E36 build would be to slap a 1J or a 2J in there and go drifting with it. But there's many other people who just simply turn them into stance cars, cruisers, track toys, whatever. They really can do it all. Now, the negatives to this being a BMW engine, if parts do go wrong, you might be paying slightly more for it, but they are fairly accessible locally from what I understand. Also, these cars are getting older, so you're just gonna have to check mileage, service history, that sort of thing, and just make sure you get the right car that you want. What is quite cool as well is there were a couple South African exclusive colors. I know Santorini Blue is one of them, but I think there's 1 or 2 others, so you must maybe check it out. You can maybe get yourself something cool that forms part of the South African car history. I think these cars are being slept on at the moment, but I think their prices will start going up, especially with the drift tax on so many of the Japanese cars. I think more and more people are going to be turning to chassis like the E36 to go drifting. Now, number 2 on this list is a very, very popular car locally. And I know some of you may agree with this, some of you may not agree with this, some of you may think it should be number 1. But I personally think that this vehicle has proven itself in the car community. Most of these vehicles started off their life as workhorses and have now ended up being modified, turned into drag cars, turned into drift cars, whatever it is. People have surely done it with this platform. And of course, I'm talking about none other than the Nissan/Datsun 1400 Bakkie. Now, for those of you who don't know what a 1400 Bakkie is, maybe from overseas, it is effectively a Datsun Sunny pickup. And I think they are absolutely fantastic. In Japan and in other parts of the world, they did get a long wheelbase version, but we only got the short wheelbase version and we got it in numbers. These cars were used as half-ton pickup trucks all over the country and were and still are used as workhorses for small businesses. But that doesn't stop people from modifying them, whether it be as little as a set of wheels to massive, crazy builds. I, for instance, have seen one that is running around Gauteng that is Focus ST Orange, has a CBR 1000 engine in it, and full pushrod suspension in the rear. It is absolutely incredible, and I think that illustrates that the only limitation to these cars is your imagination. Now, the downsides to them, there's only 2 seats, obviously being a single cab pickup, so it's not a family vehicle by any means, and they are relatively small, so if you are extremely tall, it might be something to consider. But apart from that, these vehicles have proven themselves on the drag strip many times. Being rear-wheel drive, I'm sure there are some people that are crazy enough out there to have turned them into drift missiles, but the ceiling on these is really up to you. Now, having said that, we arrive at number 1. These cars were made all the way from 1974, and here in South Africa, they ended production only in 2009. These cars formed the backbone of many families from the 70s, 80s, 90s, and even the 2000s. They are hugely popular. Parts are available all over the place, and as with the Beetle, you've probably either owned one or you definitely know someone who has. And I am, of course, talking about the Mark I Golf. The Mark I Golf went through many iterations here in South Africa. Obviously, the original ones then got a facelift, and we ended up with the City range, which ended with the Velocity in 2009. Starting out as a very basic family hatchback, the last iteration of it had aircon, airbags, CD player, everything you could want. It had it. Now, I think this huge variety also opens up a very nice window for you to be able to do whatever you want with these vehicles. If you're wanting something old and classic just to restore, I think they are very capable of doing that. But if you're wanting something newer that you don't mind butchering up, or you want to slam, put some good wheels on, it's a very viable candidate for that too. People track these, people use them as sound cars. They are just very, very popular in South Africa due to their affordability, availability. The ease of finding parts is very, very important, especially for your first project car. And they're not overly complex, especially the older ones. I would, however, suggest maybe going for a fuel-injected one. It will be less of a learning curve than maybe one of the old carbureted ones. Unless you fiddled with carbs a couple times, then that might be an option. The older ones came out as a two-door, and those have become very desirable, and as such, their prices have shot through the roof. And these cars are very capable with whatever you're wanting to do. If you go to the East Rand of Gauteng, you will often see Golf ones dominating the local drag scene. And in the same breath, you go to any car show, and these slammed, bagged, coil-overed Golf ones also tend to steal the show. Many track days will have at least one or two Golf ones in the field, and it's not uncommon to see people still using their Golfs as daily drivers too. I think all in all, a Golf 1 is a very well-rounded first project car. It ticks most of the boxes and really does hold a special place in many of our hearts. Having said that, with all of these cars, there's obviously a negative as well. It is an older car, again, safety is an issue. Theft is always an issue, as seems to be a very common theme here. And as many of you are probably aware, check the door handles. They will never work. So just check that out. Make sure that you keep a couple spare because you don't want to get locked in or out of your car. But anyway, guys and girls, that pretty much wraps up this list. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Let us know. This is a new format for us. We know that we've left out a lot that you guys might have liked to have seen added to this list. If you did enjoy this content, please smash that subscribe button, hit the like button, share it with your friends, and comment below, because I know you guys will either agree or disagree with many of these cars. We want to hear from you. Let us know what you would add or take off of this list and why down in the comments below. Thanks again for watching, and we will see you next week.